Started here. Welcome everybody to the Wednesday finance meeting. Which one to start us off with the? Do you want me to just call it to order and see if there's any?
Sorry. Yeah.
So we'll call us to order. See if there's any public comment. Hearing none, we'll get on with the main festivities. Just to provide a little bit of background, we had the library come to the Board of Commissioners to present their annual assessment of their financial needs. Coming after the development of a consensus building process and an MOU, this is the first time the library came back to the Board of Commissioners. They provided 3 options with explanation. There was discussion, and the commissioners went back and came up with lots of questions, which is an indication, I think, that your request is being taken in a serious vein. And the plan was then, given the extent of the questions and the limits of the time, to try and get some of the more sort of factual yes or no, define this, define that questions out of the way, and then leave some time for some of the big, as we call Lollapalooza kinds of questions, which are more in depth. So what the library did provide us with written answers to the questions that were more straightforward, and left time or left space in their advice to discuss, I believe there are 2 questions, more of a strategic nature. So what I thought we could do, in the interest of time, is to go through all the questions, see if the commissioners have any questions regarding the answers provided or the responses provided, and we'll keep our eyes on the clock and leave at least half the time, i.e. 45 minutes, to go for the big questions. If that's agreeable with everybody, can we proceed like that?
Sounds good.
Okie dokie, so I'll turn it over to you guys.
Number 1 was a pretty straightforward question, and I can see where maybe some confusion arose. What is meant by the term collection expenditures? Those are not collection in the sense of collecting debts. It is collection as in terms of the library's collection, library materials, books, periodicals, databases, all those types of things. Number 2, what is the? I'm sorry.
So any more questions on that?
Number 2, what is the amount of outstanding receivables, books, fees, etc.? We have in our computer system 7 years worth of debt that we've recorded. And over that 7-year period, there are 70,408 accounts that have balances due. We expect a good number of those will be paid this year. Last year, about 20,000 accounts were paid, the same for the year before. About 20,000 accounts had payments in full made on them. The median amount owed is $3. The average amount is $16.72. And I listed some information there that gives you a little bit of background on how we handle what our overdue rates are, the fact that people cannot borrow items if they owe $5 or more in fees to the library, or if they have outstanding library materials that are overdue. And then we refer people to a collection agency if the bill is unpaid and their debts are $25 or more. And they're referred after 30 days to a collection agency.
Just
Yes.
I have a question on that. The 7 years. Suppose somebody hasn't paid their debt for a 7-year period, and it's removed from the computer system. Does that mean essentially that they can come back in the next year and
It's
borrow?
possible.
Yeah.
They can sign up. Their card is removed from the system, and they can sign up for a library card again.
Okay.
Now,
So
those
there's
that
no
are
record. There's no record of the fact that they owe the library system money.
no, not under 7 years.
Okay.
There are some cases where maybe the amount is so egregious that we retain that information. But for the most part, it's pretty hard to collect a 7-year-old debt.
Can the library just set up a policy that if you owe any money, you don't borrow any more books until you pay it off? Because we have $240,000 worth of outstanding debt since 2014. You could eliminate all this by just saying, you want to borrow another book or whatever, pay up what you owe. Because I can imagine sending this out, these letters, going out to the collection agencies, it's expensive. So my point, maybe it's very simple. You don't pay up, you don't get a book.
Well, that's one way to approach it. We wouldn't eliminate all the debt, obviously, because
No, but it would eliminate any debt going forward.
no, there still could be debt, but people just don't pay. They borrow something and then they just don't pay it. But,
Meaning they never come back.
right, they
We
just
never
never
see
come back.
them.
We never see them.
I understand that, but
So there would be the possibility of debt moving forward. The reason why we've set it at $5 is there are a number of things that enter into that. Has to do with people who can't afford the $5, don't happen to have the $5 with them. A lot of kids.
I think the big question is though, why aren't there any consequences
Might have very consequences. Well, there are. They can't borrow anything if they
for
owe $5, more than $5 in debt.
forever?
For 7 years at least.
You know, this kind of jumped out at me too, because it's also, you know, you have not only the fees that, you know, haven't been paid as a result of them not returning items, but it's the value of the items themselves and you having to, the library system having to replace, I assume, those items that are not returned. I mean, so, you know, it seems to me that, you know, we're offering free service here for anybody who walks in the door and wants to get a book or whatever. But there's certain rules as to when they're supposed to return it so that others can, you know, also avail themselves of the free service, which we know nothing is free. But so I mean, it's also hindering the library's ability to restock the shelves. You know, if you or items that are not on the shelves that ought to be on the shelves and available to everybody.
so if somebody comes in, checks out a book, you don't hear from them again, do you have a feel if they're like from Cumberland County or outside the area?
They're from all over, but we're not, majority of them would be from Cumberland County because that's largely our base of operations.
So when that happens, we do know who they are and where they live, right?
In theory, yeah, we do know who they are, we do know what the current address was when they registered for their card. And when we refer people to a collection agency, they also go through, they check for changes of address. We're developing a system this year where all of the addresses in our database will be checked annually against the national change of address listings, so that we're constantly updating the database. It's a challenge keeping up with. I think I read a statistic not too long ago that like 25–26% of our county is constantly moving. You know, it's moving to a new address at some point.
You know, but the problem is, and I understand that the fine, you know, only goes up to the amount of the item, the cost of the value of the item, okay? But not returning those materials is like theft.
It is
okay?
that. It's prosecutable by law.
Yeah. And, you know, I don't know, I have a problem with, we understand that, you know, we want to make these items available and understand the difficulties that some folks have in terms of ability to pay, and that's why they come to the library to begin with. Okay. On the other hand, you know, it doesn't give them the right to take things away from everybody else. So,
Well, one approach that could be used is to prosecute people who have overdue items that they haven't returned. Takes a lot of time, a lot of staff time that we don't have. I mean, it's a return on investment issue. And we could perhaps take that approach if we had a dedicated staff person, you know, just addressing this, because these are tens of thousands of accounts that we're talking about on an annual basis.
So what you're saying is essentially you make a business decision at that point. And although, yeah, you know, the guy stole a book, and that's not right, and that shouldn't happen. But we're running, you know, quote unquote business, and for a $30 book or a $20 book, do we expend $50 of resources to get that? You know, that's not a good business decision. Okay, but it may be a policy decision, motivation, you know, but it's not a good business decision.
I think if I may, and I don't tend to speak for the commission, this is not just, it's somewhat analogous to court costs, fees and fines and restitution. Although the amounts there are generally bigger, and there's the victims are put at, there's a more direct affront to the victims involved. I think if on a strict business basis, you are right, and I don't know that the common police courts would be particularly agreeable to hearing cases of the amount due for $30 or $50. I guess the question is, and this is, I don't think anything will resolve today, is there some kind of upfront deterrent that might work, that you might consider at some point going forward? Because the problem is, it's very small amounts, but the cumulative amount is pretty significant.
Oh, yeah. Catches your eye, doesn't it?
It certainly does.
But for those who aren't stealing books and taking books, I see no reason why we can't tell people, pay up what you owe before you take a book account. That would eliminate a lot of time on your hands. It would reduce the number of amount of outstanding fees. I don't see where that's a negative.
Well, a couple things. It makes a stronger case for the need to have the ability to accept credit cards at self-check machines and at circulation stations, and that's part of our proposal. There are always going to be exceptions where you're going to let somebody borrow something because they don't, you know, the person that you see them frequently. They just don't happen to have a wallet right now. Library directors, would you like to comment on the $5 issues? Because you confronted yourselves. Any further?
In my experience, it's been a good goad, the $5 thing, to collect funds because it's not a lot of money. So people will say, oh, I'll pay that off. I want to use the computers. I want to borrow more items. I know we had talked about raising that limit, and it sounds like there's not the will to do that, you know, $10 or $25, to make the libraries more available to the very indigent. Making it zero, I think, would leave a lot of people out.
I would add that I think that this is a discussion that we should continue to have. I think libraries have it frequently about these issues. My biggest initial concern would be that dropping it down to zero would have an immediate and dramatic impact on children's access to materials, in particularly in outreach settings and things like that where their parents aren't necessarily there. So now a child can't get a book because they owe 30 cents. And you're right, when you aggravate it all together, it's a lot, and it always needs to be looked at. But when you're refusing service to a 4-year-old because their card has 30 cents on it, that becomes a more difficult individual transaction.
I'll be advocating a library card.
You could be an infant and your parent could sign you up for one.
But who's responsible for the
The parent.
cost?
The parent or the
Not the
guardian.
14-year-old or the 10-year-old.
Until you are age 18, your parent or guardian is responsible.
There, I'm gonna call this one time-wise but I'm gonna also use my position here. One thing, going back to Paul's argument, is if there's some kind of threshold where it's truly heinous, that someone has been that negligent and abusive, you could slap an enormous punishment, late fee, whatever, that would make it worthwhile to cover your costs of collections. Again, not for the kid who owes 30 cents, because he put great jelly between the pages, but something like that where you have something that's profoundly an insult to the library system, figure out what the costs are prosecuting and do that. But I think I'll now call it after using that privilege. See if we can move on to the next one.
And I agree, Paul, you don't want to spend $50 to like a $20 book. That could come with
The people that are not bringing the material back are really the violators. I mean, we bring it back and you're 2 weeks late, at least we got it back. If we never receive it from you again and we don't get the material back, you're going, now we're agitated. Listen.
Okay, so let me, just one more question, Larry. I know we want to move on, but I just, so for those folks that have fines or that owe money, are they permitted to take out additional books even though they owe or not?
No, if it's $5 or more, either you have an outstanding item
Okay.
or you owe $5 or more in fines and fees. You cannot take out anything, you can't even use it.
If you have an outstanding item and you owe money because it's late, does the outstanding item have to be returned
Yes.
before you receive another book?
If the value of it is greater than $5, yes. If it happens to be a $2 something, I can't imagine what that would be,
Okay.
then in theory you could.
So you can't take out another item if you have an item out that's in
Overdose.
reverse? Okay.
And suggestion, maybe we put this on an upcoming library board meeting for further discussion.
Sure. I've already noted that. Questions about the funding model? How is the $821,199 amount for strategic development calculated? It just happens to be the amount that's left after withdrawals have been made to cover our deficit budgets for the past 5 years. And by coincidence, it happens to be very close to the amount that's needed to replace the first 3 months of library tax payments, $825,000 this year, that the county makes to the library system in anticipation of receiving the tax in April. So that is an amount that we'd like to keep in a contingency fund somewhere so that if we run into the same situation where the state isn't going to make good on payments that are due to the county and the county can't make those payments, or the county runs into a cash flow situation, we would have that amount of money and wouldn't have to take out any tax anticipation notes. Part B to that question was, what are the other funds? And could the unassigned fund be rolled into the 90-day contingency fund? Well, I'm not going to read all of that to you, or do you have any questions about the four funds that exist?
Do we need 4 funds?
I think we probably need 3 funds. We certainly have to have an unassigned fund for cash flow purposes. We need to have a contingency fund.
Yes.
And we
it's-
probably need to
Strategic
have,
development seems something of a misnomer.
well,
Strategic development funds generally are funds where people stash away stuff for future capital projects.
That was the name that was given to us by the
So-
commissioners 15 years ago.
So maybe could we skip to C, which I think covers a lot of the questions in A and B, is that given the current array of special funds resulting to a degree from special circumstances surrounding the 2004 agreement, would it be a good time to define a new workable and forward-looking definition of solvency for CCLC, and if so, what would it be?
Well, with the caveat that the finance committee hasn't had a chance to look at this yet, my thoughts on the matter were that we agree that 2004 Strategic Development Fund agreement should be torn to pieces at this point, and a new agreement reached. Probably, I would recommend to the board that we have 3 funds: an unassigned fund for cash flow purposes, a 90-day contingency fund, not 90 days, a contingency fund that covers both a possible missing state aid payment that's made to us at the beginning of each year and possible missing county tax payments to us at the beginning of the year for those first 3 months. Delayed payments.
Have you ever, Dana, have we ever missed a delay?
During the state budget impasse, we were talking about delay.
And that was a given. We were told to expect a delay of the state budget in passing to you. And
Did we actually delay?
we did not, because the state budget impasse ended at the end of December. There might have been a couple day delay.
It was a couple, I think it was 2 weeks for the first
Yeah,
payment, but it
it
wasn't
was.
substantial, right?
And the technology fund, I think we do need to have a technology fund because our budget for those line items becomes very volatile over, when you look at the 5-7 year period. Some years, 5-year life cycle replacements are much higher than what would be found in a typical year. So either we need to have money to replace that, to add to the operating fund, or we need to start banking funds in order to buy something big, like an integrated library system software platform.
And what it does is it gives us flexibility, and you're not tied to the purchase agreement being a leasing arrangement. Right? Again, we need to buy a software license for 5 years. We either write you a check today, or we write you 60 checks for the next 6 months. So if you don't have the money to write it today, well then that's easy. We're gonna have to go to lease now. So the flexibility to make that.
So allow me to play devil's advocate. What it sounds like is you've got a whole bunch of risks for your cash management. And then you got some long-term stuff that's pretty project specific, even though projects are bound to arise. If you have multiple essentially at-risk funds to cover your cash management, and each of them has a threshold, the tendency is, I think, by splitting them up like that, it either is or it gives the appearance of being somewhat excessive as compared to figuring out what your total cash management risk is and providing for that in perhaps a single entity. You don't know till you run the numbers. But again, if it's time to relook at things relative to what was agreed to on 2004, because there was a lot more than just managing short-term cash flow issues that was involved with it. We were given 10 years to make a whole bunch of money last. I think it would be something that would be worthwhile. And that is not to preclude what you're saying about when you think you have, or in general you want to be prepared for some kind of specific project with a big price tag, that you start squirreling away money for that. But right now, it just looks like we've got multiple buckets. And each one of them, we're trying to keep each of them to the single, an appropriate level, whereas if we combined it into a single bucket, maybe that combined level might be lower.
On the contingency fund, part of it is made up of the anticipated annual state aid payment. Have they ever not paid?
1 year, the payment was delayed until, let's see, April? May? I'm not sure. I have to go back. In my 24 years, usually they make the payment January, February. There have been at least one instance in my memory where it was significantly later in the year.
Would it be fair to ask that instead of the contingency for 12 months, maybe make it 6 months? Because if there's never been an incident, we've never paid. If the latest has been April, it seems like we're making a bigger contingency than it's needed.
That's easy.
I mean, if you don't think that makes sense, just say so. You're not gonna hurt my feelings. I'm just trying to
In
get
trying
my
to,
hands around the reserves.
in trying to quantify any risk, you take the amount, but then you have to have an experience, what's the probability that it'll actually happen? And generally that leads to discounting. Okay, so if it happens frequently, it's much closer to the total amount of risk. If it happens very infrequently, sometimes you discount it appropriately. Given that any year it doesn't happen, you've got money to cover.
It's certainly something the finance committee could talk about. If there are no further questions on those funds, I'll move on to question 4.
Can I just, the procedures? At your next finance meeting, we'd be interested to hear the results of any discussion items that you guys might have. And when is your next finance meeting?
October 3rd.
Okay, good. Thank you.
If Wi-Fi bandwidth is increased, does this pose any type of risk of hacking? Are there any questions about the response there?
That was my question.
Okay.
It's just with so much crap going on in the world today.
Right.
I mean, geez, but you've answered my question. Thank you.
Do you see using county senior citizens to mentor youth? I think I know where that question came from. Was that Commissioner Hertzler by any chance?
No.
I'd be one of them.
Well, others may share your same sentiment.
Suffice it to say, he's the spokesperson.
Well, Jim, did I respond to your question?
Yeah,
It may not be the countywide program that you're looking for, but I do think a number of our libraries work in that area.
yeah, I just think that we need, and again, this is something I've been talking about for a while, and you know, it's something that I've also brought up in conversations with the Aging Advisory Board and our Office of Aging. But I think that, you know, one of the things we're talking about, if we're going to provide additional resources, is, you know, how can I justify that to the populace? And one of the ways I would justify that to the populace is that we're establishing a program that essentially has a great opportunity to, you know, help to provide mentoring for young people who may come from single parent or no parent households, which will help to solve hopefully a bunch of societal ills that we have, along with the fact that we have a lot of seniors, widows or widowers, who essentially still have so much to give. And so our older citizens, you know, still have a lot to contribute, and our younger citizens have a lot to learn. And, you know, we're dealing with issues relative to our seniors and whether or not we're trying to maintain a situation where our older citizens can remain active in the community and in their homes for as long as possible.
We don't disagree with
Yeah.
any of that.
And I would like to see, and again, I'm not looking for big government bureaucracy here, but I would like to see more of an initiative, more in the way of coordination, if you will. We've got a lot of retired teachers in this county.
And that's exactly what we're using
Yeah.
for some of these
Yeah.
programs.
So, you know, I just would like to see some further, if these are community centers, and that's what they are, okay? It seems like a golden opportunity to expand upon this effort. So,
Right. Well, we are working in that area and we'd like to do more. It's a matter of staff capacity.
okay. And again, I mean, I know I'm reading over the various things that you are doing, and it's just something I think we want to continue to build on it.
Jim, do you think it would be possible to, if the library is saying it should be more, if it had more staff, might it be possible to talk to Sandy and the aging to see
Yeah.
if it dovetails enough with any of their programs that they might be able to provide some support?
Yeah, I think it makes sense, and, and I think it's a matter of, again, I think more than anything, it's a matter of coordination. I know other counties in the state have launched intergenerational programs, and, whether it's, seniors helping youngsters to learn how to read, or reading with them. And I know in this day and age, we have to always be worried, the background checks and all that. But I just think that it serves two key areas, and that is, especially providing that kind of mentoring that young people, especially those who come from single and dual parent households, and then in addition to that, giving some of the older citizens, more reason to live.
Quality of life. Quality of life. We'd be happy to investigate that policy. Library usage among the population base. Any questions about that response?
Just a second on that. I'm
Yes.
trying to,
That was question 6.
Yeah, it was the question about the library cards and such. Not sure I fully grasped it. So 34%, what is the eligible population? Is that age, age? The response reads, of the county's eligible population.
I'm not sure why
34%.
I put the word eligible in there. It's just of the county's population. 34% are registered for cards.
Okay, so 34% of our base number is registered for a library card. And you have to have the card to borrow any
And to have
material.
the card to borrow anything, you have to have the card in order to use a computer as well.
Okay, that's one of the questions I had. So it's a pretty safe assumption that the vast majority of people walking through the doors are card holders. It's not that you have a lot of use
Well,
by people who are not.
I wouldn't say that because families typically have one card per household. So the vast majority of people walking in the door may not, I'd say that might be an overstatement. Because typically you find the mom in the household, whoever the primary caregiver is, has the card.
I think Gary's saying that the people that are coming into it have a card, whether it's the spouse's card or it's in their name or their spouse's name, versus people showing up and using the computer that aren't on the mall. That doesn't happen. They're on the mall somehow, whether it's them or
Wouldn't
their
this
spouse.
statistic on households be more sort of what we're looking for here?
It's true, our software doesn't spit it out that way.
Would you say you're saying 80%
of households.
Well, what I'm saying is that the number of cards is 83% of all households. So somewhere between 34% and 83% are the number of people who are using our library system from Cumberland County. Now, I do want to put a caveat there. It is possible for somebody to walk in from out of town, Philadelphia, they're here on business, and walk into the library. We give them a guest pass for the day, so they can log into the computer. Nowadays, most of it, not, where we find out that most of the time is with the Appalachian hikers. But most times now, they just hook into the Wi-Fi. Any other questions on that?
I just want to be clear on that. The reason I asked that is because the question I've been asking for years is whether we are growing or declining in terms of the overall, not the number of materials going out the door,
Right.
but I have to tell you, when I speak about the library out in public, or when I just read letters, I get an awful lot of people who say, I haven't been there in years, I don't use the library. And of course, a lot of them are saying, I don't want to have to pay tax because I don't use the library, or something of that nature. And it becomes those are the people who are most vocal, obviously. So, but I have been surprised at the number of folks who tell me they've never used the library or haven't walked into the library in a decade. And of course, that somewhat corresponds with the concern that we have of the relevancy of libraries in the digital age. We keep hearing that over and over and over. We've all heard it, almost to a tiresome degree, I would imagine, that there's questions about how much information is available online versus what we used to go to the library for. And I think some of what I'm hearing is a reflection of that. There are a certain number of folks who aren't utilizing the facility that much
And there
anymore.
probably always will be.
And, well, my question is that a trend? Or do we have a sliding base of support for the library? Because if we do, then the libraries obviously are facing a needs deficit, not financial deficit, all that can result, but needs deficit. Are we meeting the needs of a broad base of our citizenry in terms of the services we're providing? And relevancy is the key question, I think, that a lot of organizations, public and private, have to ask themselves in this age, for digital reasons and other reasons as well. But so I'm trying to get at that relevancy question. Are we still relevant to the broadest number of people possible to represent our campus population?
Well, I think we are still relevant to the broadest number of people possible at the current levels of funding. I remember clearly, I think it may have been you, Gary, saying once that if you gave us $5 million more, we would find a way to spend it and create more usage for the libraries. So there's a balance between trying to determine what the needs of the community are and what the library should provide. And I think the library primarily serves particular constituencies. The very young, families with kids. You see them in the library every day. And I think you also see retired senior citizens. People tend to use us when they're in school, and then they return to us when they have children. And then if they're not avid readers, they may stop for a while. And then when they retire, they're back attending the programs. So all I can say is I've never been asked the question of the county's eligible population. I took that eligible from your phrase up above. Of the county's population, 34% are currently registered for cards. We can continue to monitor that.
Okay. Yeah, when I used the term eligible, I didn't realize it was redundant because everybody's eligible.
Everybody's eligible.
Well, our population's somewhere in the neighborhood, I think, of 246,000. Now, when you say eligible population, I guess we're talking about anybody who's over what age?
A week.
Oh, wait.
I'll say a 2-year-old
That's out
coming in
there with cards.
Ex-usual.
Pretty small.
But, so then you say 34%, so 34, is that 34% of 246,000 people?
Yes.
That probably, I hope that's 95 grand. Because that's the number she's got in the chart.
Okay.
94, 944, so
Okay.
it's 95,
And then,
34.
all right, and then you guesstimate it's 83% of all households. I don't know how you arrive at that, but.
Well, I know the number of library cards, 95,000. And I know the number of households in Cumberland County, so it's a percentage of that.
Okay.
using census figures.
Households include rental units and,
I
assume
assume so.
all
It came from the census.
individual livings came from where the census?
Mhm.
Okay.
I think
That's-
if you look at all the county services,
Mhm.
okay, you can ask the question, what percentage of the population utilizing it? You can ask about drug and alcohol, you can ask about health, you can ask it about planning, you can ask about the prison, you can ask about public safety. And nowhere is it 100% used by everybody,
Mhm.
right? The question is how essential the service is and, or what is mandated by the law for you to do that. I think the interesting question is the trend.
Mhm.
Is it more, are we on a level trend, an upward trend, or a downward trend?
Mhm.
Because we fund things
Well,
either because we have to.
you can see trends in the 15-year trend chart that I gave you. And you can see that the number is down from 2010. But 2010 was probably the height of the recession. And libraries are typically used a lot more during the recession. So I would expect the numbers from 2010 to 2015 to decline somewhat. And in fact, they have, in many cases. In some cases, they've kind of gone through the roof.
And you're saying here there's no way to determine, unique visits to the library
No.
versus,
No, unless we put a barcode on everybody's head and blended you as you came in the door. I don't know of any technology that can do that.
everybody has a library card, and I assume they check something out, but, now that, I guess,
They do,
Yes,
they
no.
would repeat that, I don't know how to answer that.
okay.
I think there's a more sophisticated statistical analysis that can be done, and we could actually help you out. I don't think a 15-year period is appropriate. I think you need to look at a longer period, because in a short chunk like 15, a 5-year anomaly, like going from the height of a recession to a recovery, is going to skew your results. But even with what you've got here, somehow the problem here is you've got a million different things. But my guess is that over a period of time, you're going to see, even if you factor in population growth and account for that, I think you're going to see something that's holding relatively steady and or going up a scotch. And that's only the stuff that you can capture, okay? The more you got people sitting outside your library using the Wi-Fi or hotspots, it's use of the library that you're probably not capable of capturing at this point. Whether that compensates for people like my kids. I remember having this discussion with this library zealot who was screaming, and I was going, but the internet, and I turned to this person and I said, do your kids ever use the library? And she said, no. And I said, neither do mine. So I think, I think there's a better way to come up with this. I don't think there's an easy answer, but I think we could do a better job. But I suspect that it's actually kind of holding somewhat steady, even in spite of the fact that a lot of people don't use it like they used to use it when the library was the only alternative for entertainment, written content, and books. So that's my guess.
Yeah, then, you don't have any data as to then if we can't have unique visits, we don't know how often a typical, I'm curious as to, somebody who uses the library, how often do they use the library? What percentage of, of all those who have library cards are, visit the library on a weekly basis, a monthly basis, maybe only once a year, twice a year? And then the other question I had on inactive, when mean, essentially the card, when does a library card become inactive? How long?
We only keep registrations on file for 3 years.
3
If
years.
you haven't used it in 3 years, it gets purged.
Okay, so the library card holders at 94,944, those folks at least have used their library card
The last
once in
years.
the past 3 years.
Mhm.
Just a point of order here, we're at 45 minutes into the hour and a half. Why don't we give 15 more minutes to get through the rest of the quote factual questions?
Okay. Number 7, is there a recognized national benchmark, perhaps dollars per capita figure? I think I've shared this information with you before. The most recent information we have for dollars per capita is from 2014 on a national basis. And they don't say county government, they say local government, which would include township, borough, village, in some states, and county. So you can see where CCLS was in 2014 at $13.80 per capita. The statewide average were 30% lower than the statewide average, and we're 141% from the national average. Interestingly, one category stands out: library raised income. That would be fines, fees, fundraising. We are actually higher across the board in all those categories. So to me, that demonstrates that we are outperforming others across the state and the nation in terms of collecting our fines and fees and getting the fundraising dollars into the door. And then in the next chart below, I listed some peer states, just to give you an idea of peer states in terms of peer states with Pennsylvania, where we stand.
One question on this.
Yes.
And I guess I mean this in a more general sense, not just this chart.
Uh-huh.
But when you're talking about the library system, you're talking about the the books for the member libraries are included in here, as
Yes.
well as the countywide
Yes.
system.
It's
It's
a
all
county
aggregated.
snapshot, aggregated together.
Right, thank you.
It's embarrassing to be that far behind New Jersey.
Well,
Sorry, it's an editorial comment.
are there any questions about any of that data? Okay, question 8, I think, was one of the big questions, so maybe we'll defer that to a little bit later. Number 9, the 14% increase in local library support. How is that determined? There were a number of things that helped determine that amount. We looked at the amount of money that was required to help those of our member libraries that were hardest hit by the recession to be able to restore operating hours if they felt that was where their greatest need was, or collection development budgets. We also looked at the amount of money that would be required to sustain the system headquarters. System headquarters doesn't have the capacity to raise funds privately. Only our member libraries really have that capacity. We can qualify for some grants, but most of those dollars go to our member libraries when we get private fundraising dollars at the system level in the form of grants. And letter C, the amount of money that would be required to implement those system-wide service improvements, those projects that were identified by our member libraries, is being important. Whether it be a development coordinator, whether it be upgrading the self-check stations or the circulation stations so that we can accept credit cards, making children's literacy technology improvements, all those projects were factored in. And then trying to keep the tax request increase at a reasonable level.
Is it 14% across the board? 14%, does that get divided evenly amongst the 7 libraries? Because I'm heading to your formula here.
Right. The formula If we use the same formula, it would be roughly a 14% increase for each library. There are always going to be slight fluctuations each year depending upon how a library performs in terms of circulation or program attendance, that kind of thing. We are looking at some other possible funding models that would incorporate some other possible elements other than just circulation and program attendance being our primary indicators of usage. That would incorporate things like technology, that type of thing.
Is it safe to say that in terms of the hits that our libraries took during the recession, can we say that perhaps the places like John Graham,
Given.
yeah, Amelia Gibbon and
Shippensburg?
Shippensburg may have been hit harder than, say, the ones on the west
At the
shore?
other funding models we're looking at, yes, they would be. Are there guidelines? Currently, we don't have guidelines. We rely on our local library boards to plan the service, to meet the services of their local community. We talked about making a priority of ending deficit budgets, restoring hours if that's appropriate for the local community. We'd be happy to entertain the notion of creating guidelines, but we're really not this time interested too much in doing that. Just one more thing to add to the list of things to do. How will we know how those funds are used? They'll be reported on each library's annual report to the state and to the audit. And in the audit, they'll also be discussed at our CCLS Finance Committee meetings. And 10, is there a possibility the proposed coordinator could be used for other things? If I left you with the impression that the fundraising coordinator would just be training people how to use the software, I'm sorry, that was wrong. They would be relied upon to do a lot more than that, and I've listed some of the responsibilities there. Are there gaps or limits to what the software provides? I wasn't really sure exactly what this question meant, but we're not aware of any gaps or limits to the development software. I think that's some of the features there. Are there any questions about any elements of question 10?
Would you be is it antithetical or against your consciences to set targets if you were to create this new position?
Oh, no, that would be part of any kind of performance evaluation.
Keep going.
Okay, then I guess move back to, well, why don't we do question 11 since we're there? The library of the future. What's our working definition? I've listed our working definition there and some of the critical changes that would need to occur to realize that vision. A lot of them have to do with space in each of our member libraries for community meetings, gatherings. Could be one-on-one kinds of meetings, or it could be, large 100 people kinds of gatherings. Also, space for technology. If we wanted to add more computers to libraries, a significant number, it would not be possible at some libraries. It would be very difficult at others. Just having the space for technology, having dedicated staff who are trained to be able to assist people are issues. Expanding and improving rural facilities in Newville and Mount Holly Springs are two places that are very much on our wish list. They don't really have the local fundraising capacity to be able to support a major capital campaign. And I think the possibility of having maybe some matching grant funds from the county to help kickstart some of those campaigns might really be a huge help to those, rural communities. And developing and providing outreach programs that bring the collections and services and programs to communities that are more at risk and perhaps unlikely to visit the library at this time. And finally, an evaluation of new technologies, such as radio frequency identification tags. That's a very expensive project, should we seek to undertake it, so we want to be sure that there's a definite return on investment. Also, having a technology consultant to look at not only that, but how we use mobile devices, and we use them wisely with both staff and the public. I've listed 3 things there that we might reasonably be expected to do. That a technology evaluation, beginning to provide more outreach programs, and begin expanding and improving rural facilities. All those things really require more dollars in order to carry them out.
You don't think it take you 5 years to do an initial evaluation of new technologies, do you?
Oh, no. You asked me in the next 5 years what we can expect to do. So I would see that as a 1-year.
So is, in terms of library of the future, what you talked about is having space for technology, having space for some of the less endowed facilities. So are you seeing any other changes in, if we were to walk into, let's pick on Basler because it's across the street. If we were to walk into Basler today and walk into Basler 5 years, and I'll ask Jeff this at the same time. So if I walk into Basler today, okay, with that card we have, that if I go to Market Cross, allows me to get a discount on a beer, and I see the library, then I go back and then I'm like Austin Powers and I'm cytogenically frozen, and I come back in 5 years. What do you think I'm going to see? Do I see mostly what I see today? Is it going to be different?
Realistically, I guess I would say that you would still see probably most of the types of things you see today, because I often say libraries are not about books, but about access to information. But the modes for that may reconfigure the library a little bit. I think that, in a library that has a capacity both in funding and in structure, you might see more technologies that go even beyond internet access, but to maker spaces and invention centers. You may see the collections. There are some libraries that are starting to see surveys done that say, keep your collections, but hone them down to really the very most, germane to what our community needs, and make more space for community gathering and civic engagement. I think you'll probably see arguably a heightened health sort of literacy and engagement in healthy living and access to resources related to that. So I don't think that fundamentally you would walk in and not be able to recognize it as a library. I think you would still walk in and see different types of collections, technologies, programs for kids. I think that in the children's area, for example, you would see the same kind of traditional story times, but probably more of an infusion of technologies, early literacy computer stations to help get children started at the earliest ages in a technology-driven world and engage them. So I don't think fundamentally you'd walk in and say this doesn't look like a library anymore, but I think it will continue to evolve to address the way our culture is changing and the way they learn. So that would be my kind of first.
How about Bonnie and Jody, what do you think?
I think automating behind the scenes is going to happen more and more. So maybe the way books are processed, it might not necessarily be by humans. And for example, for the larger libraries, I know there's automation out there, that uses conveyor belts and way, to get books to and fro, and materials to and fro. think that's going to happen. I think there's no denying the role of audio and video in our society, so yes, books will continue to be there, but there's, more and more a larger reliance on audio and video. Even with the computers, Jeff just mentioned, kids learn to read by hearing the book sounded out rather than having a person sound them out to them. They hear the computer sound out the words and are able to adjust, use phonics accordingly to how they're learning. There's that. And then to back up what Jeff said, I think more and more there'll be reliance on local collections. So what's, Civil War, for example, is Shippensburg interest, but then, so all different libraries would have local, but more use of sharing books among the other libraries that are like the popular books and festivals, kind of like we do today on a larger scale.
I just have 2 additions to those great statements. Frederickson is increasingly being used as the community center for the entire West Shore. The West Shore suffers from sprawl, but that's an opportunity for us to be the center. So we have plans in place to maybe open a second entrance on the lower level to remove physical barriers to usage of the library. And we have various projects that we're thinking about to increase our programming spaces. We could offer so much more in the way of programming. And when you look at statistics, which I'm not sure were pictured here completely, we're exploding for programming. People are coming to the library to enjoy events. They may not be borrowing books, but they are using the library, and they're using it a lot. We just had 600 people attend our volunteer fair last Tuesday. We're going to have an employment expo next month, which last year we got 600 people to that. So as a community center, that's going to expand over the next 5 years. The RFID is expensive, but to your issue, it helps us to make our collections secure. Right now, people can just walk out the door with whatever they feel like. There's really no security, and that would enable that. It also would enable us to reduce some of our staff. You can check out a pile of books by just passing it under an RFID machine. That might take 15 minutes at one of our desks.
It's automation.
It's really automated.
How's the project at the East Medford Township building coming?
It's great. We hope to open that branch before the end of the year.
Okay, and that's being moved, what, to where the gymnasium was?
Yes, it's in the downstairs level. So the great thing that we're gaining from that is we're gaining an entrance, our own entrance, into the parking lot. So we will be able to open on Saturdays.
Okay, I was just thinking in terms of you're saying that Frederickson is in demand for community. Are you looking possibly to utilize the East Pennsville branch?
Yeah, definitely.
Or
It's little, but it's going to
not, I know that, it's not, but it's better than going up on where the third floor.
Absolutely. It's going to be small but perfect, I think. We're really looking forward to it.
Okay. When's that opening? When is it?
We don't have a definite date. It'll hopefully be before the end of the year.
And the off-site programming at the end.
Yes, we have a delivery system, and that's probably something that we will pursue over the next 5 years. Thanks, Paul. We have a delivery system with Hamden now, so people can just drop their things off at the pool, the recreation center, actually. I'd like to explore that with our other 6 municipalities. I think that it's something that can be
This is
done.
pick up and drop off? Or
Yes,
okay.
yes,
Yeah.
exactly. It's not a branch, but it's a
Right.
service. And one of the barriers to Hamden folks using us is Carlisle Pike. It's not far geographically, but it's the traffic.
Yeah,
So,
no, that's right.
yeah, we circulate about 5,000 items now from Hamden to Frederickson per year.
Of course, we offered you a great location for Frederickson, across from
I
Adams
know.
Park, but, we had it located right in the borough, but that's okay.
I've not heard that. Is it true? Is that true?
If I could just add that when Jody was talking about technologies like RFID and conveyor belts and automations, there are some wonderful technologies out there that are not overly sophisticated, but sophisticated enough, but pricey, that create outreach locations like that for pickup and drop off. Much like if you go to Hershey Park and you can get your key and put your locker thing, there are ones that assign you a locker with your book on hold in it, and you can stop and pick it up. And so, I mean, there are a lot of those kinds of things I think will continue to evolve in the library world in regard to that as well.
So, in the commissioner's task is to determine, and I think, you know, I think you heard from Teacher Nico at the last board meeting, there's general support for providing more support. But the question is, for what? And I think this issue of expansion is a key one. My understanding, you know, Shippensburg is going through a big expansion, Bosler finished a big expansion. That was mostly, if not entirely done, and I don't know that we gave any money to that at all.
And Bosler received a $2.5 million RACP grant from the state, and then the rest of the funds were raised locally.
I think Shippensburg's the same way. They've got one or two grants, I think.
Right, well, I'm still working on getting that right.
You're still
But yes,
working.
right, I've been doing that for a week now.
So the interesting but very practical question becomes, you have libraries that, and I'm going to assume Frederickson and the library in Mechanicsburg have similar pools of local funding and grants and stuff that they could draw on. This, in your vision, you specifically state, and correctly so, that Mount Holly and Louisville are areas.
Well, and I'd also add that Shippensburg, its original vision for its building included much larger community meeting room space. But they received state level grants and have done some local fundraising. But the local fundraising has not yet met those goals. And so as a result, those plans have to be scaled back significantly.
But I see the Shippensburg Library looks a lot bigger in the back anyway. But here's my question. If you're looking at library of the future, probably the most expensive thing is additional space, capital construction, or what have you.
I'd say the most expensive thing is staff.
Most-
Staff.
Staff you can need more or less of depending how much technology you use. And such. If the commissioners are looking at more at what to fill your space with, that might be one dividing line. The question also becomes, if you held your current space constant and you wanted to do things differently, you would have to reallocate space within that library. So you guys are talking about you're always going to have books. You have as much space as you currently need for books. In the future, are you going to keep it to zero growth? Or are you going to cut back and stuff like that? Because I think when you're talking about expanding the space of the two libraries, and God knows they both need it, I think that's going to be a question the commissioner's going to have to really tackle. In that, again, you have your local libraries in the in areas where it can be raised to a certain, and what do you do about these two? And I know the thought has been expressed, well, did anybody ever give thought to shutting down those libraries in their current form and turning them into feeder libraries? I don't pretend for a minute that isn't a huge political hornet's nest. And I don't even know that it's a good idea. But, I mean, do you all ever think about stuff like that? And if so, do you think it's a good idea, bad idea, or indifferent?
To think about what's a good idea, shutting them down.
Yeah.
I think it's a terrible idea.
So you thought about it?
Yes, I thought about it a great deal. Yes, I thought about it. It's a terrible idea. No, I think Newville, we actually had a study done in the mid-2000s. You probably remember this, Gary. Himmel and Wilson came in and looked at our facilities and basically said, they're located in exactly the right spots where you need them to be. They both serve very strategic purposes. Newville is smack dab in between Carlisle and Shippensburg. There's a whole population, cluster of people that go to Newville all the time, that rural area. And the same way with Mount Holly Springs. They serve a very interesting community in that some of that community is becoming more upscale. But Mount Holly Springs itself is very not upscale. So having a library there for that community is pretty important.
Right. But I think the interesting question the commissioners to grapple with is, given the fact that there's differences in ability to raise money for capital expansion,
Right.
is that something that the county should help fund as compared to all the others? That's my.
Well, I would encourage you to think along those lines, because raising money in those two communities to do what's needed there is just not
But
possible.
all of that was the setup for, aside from money for the county.
Yes.
Is there a way that you think resources could be redistributed within the library system and amongst libraries to help out the less resourced areas?
Well, not with capital expansion, because legally you can't use library tax funds to expand facilities. We just legally we're restricted by the library code. You can't do that. It's only for the operating costs of the library. So it's possible to use state aid funds, but those are dwindling. So I wouldn't look for any big help from the Department of Education. One of the things we'd like to be able to do is to hire a development coordinator to be able to support those smaller libraries with fundraising, with getting more grants, because they don't necessarily have that expertise or time available on their staff.
Is that coordinator position that you have in here, is
That
that?
is in options 1 and 2.
But it would be the job of that coordinator position
Mhm.
to in fact address that issue?
Yes.
Your help in hiring this fundraising individual, do you have a number in mind? Like how
Well-
much money you would hope they could bring in as far as fundraising outside of county and state funding?
In various seminars I have attended, usually they say that you can, I think I put that in here, you can expect
sorry,
to
I
raise,
missed it.
that's okay, I always forget what the number is. Roughly 1 to 2 times their salary.
Okay.
Yes. They should be earning at least 60 to 80% of their salary after the first year.
Okay.
So they need a year to really get their feet
No,
on the
either.
ground. And then they're earning the money back. Now, the thing is it doesn't come to the system headquarters. It goes to the member libraries, for which that person would be supported.
Time check, we have 18 minutes. You want to go on to your other, unless there's any other final questions on this one? Because we could talk about this for hours. If not, we should go on to the last big question.
The other big question, I think, was question 8. Would we be willing, interested in setting target performance measures? And the short answer is yes. We are committed to, setting goals, objectives, and performance measures for library system services. We could do that for the priority service areas that the MOU established with us. I wasn't quite sure how to answer all the other things with regard to funding and entertaining various mechanisms for funding. Certainly, we'd be happy to discuss any or all of the above. I think the most important thing for us is that having a library tax provides a pretty steady stream of income that you can rely on from year to year. So you can rely on that and plan at least to have that as your base. So it's
Certainly.
there are pros and cons to either situation.
Of course, the other flip side of that if you will, the other edge of that two-sided sword is that the public sees the tax and says, we're already paying for the libraries. That's the tax. One of the reasons why local municipalities say, oh, the county's doing that now. There's a library tax. One of the reasons why people may not feel as though they should contribute because of the county library tax. So, and then of course, you know, we have the situation with the fact that the state is providing adequate funding. But I'll hold off on those comments until we get to item 12. But in any event, I mean, I think that that's part of the problem. So you look at the local numbers and all that kind of stuff compared to the nation. Well, when you have a library tax that was voted on by the people back in what, 1986?
Yeah, 87.
People say, okay, we check that off. We're taking care of the libraries. We have a dedicated tax.
Well, I think the fundraising, when you look at the per capita fundraising, that library raising income, that speaks to the fact that people give to libraries in Cumberland County, regardless of whether or not there's a library tax. So I don't think that if you are contemplating a gift to a library that you are not going to make it because of a library tax. I forget the second part.
No, I would agree. I mean, there's some people that actually, they will give above and beyond.
Right. Well, and then the local municipalities, we have made some headway there.
I mean, we have the same issue with respect to I'll talk about our volunteer first responder organizations. Okay? In East Bedford Township, my hometown, we now have a fire tax. Okay? It's going to be interesting to see what that does to the level of citizen donations to the volunteer fire companies. Now, I will grant you that one of the big problems we had is the fact that we would have, fixed income senior citizen, right, writing her or his check out for $75 or $100 to the fire company, but our big corporations, gave a goose egg for the volunteer fire protection that they rely on if there's a fire at their business. I mean, how much support do we get from the business community with respect to supporting our public libraries?
Well, I think we get a fair amount. I think whenever you are raising funds, all the literature tells you that it's not businesses who donate money. It's individuals who donate money. And that's where the lion's share of gifts come from in any kind of fundraising campaign. For businesses, I know that the Library System Foundation is getting about $30,000, $40,000 a year in support via the Educational Improvement Tax Credit Program. We would get donations from businesses. Now that program,
Well, they screwed it up.
they screwed it up last year.
Was
But,
it a technical?
yeah, that was it. Thank you. I appreciate that.
That's how we speak in the county. They screwed it up.
So I don't know if any of our directors could speak to.
Yeah, well, that
business
essentially,
support.
relieves the business taxpayer liability. Right? They can contribute X and they get a tax credit.
Right.
All right. My point is that I guess what concerns me is, and a lot of it has to do with the fact that a lot of our businesses are no longer local businesses. We've had this discussion before. They're corporations with, their CEOs are outside of the area somewhere. But I think, that's one of the things that we need to also work on in terms of, encouraging our business community to, consider. I know, it's not easy to run a successful business these days, but it contributes to the quality of life in the community for their employees, you know, who live here, most of them. So I just think there needs to be continued outreach in that respect as well. But anyway, I'll let you go. Where are we on this?
I can't say enough for having the fact that Frederickson and Osler have development directors. Our development director brings in 6 times what we pay her. And it's evenly distributed among businesses, philanthropists. And to my knowledge, we've never had any of the philanthropists say, I'm not giving because I pay the library tax. They give because they really want us to exist and to be able to expand. So this year, we're going to bring in about $300,000, which is 25% of my budget. It's huge. We wouldn't be what we were without that. So I would love to see it available for the smaller libraries. I just think you would see exponential change if you had someone like that.
Our development officer, since the new building opened, because of course when you're doing a capital campaign, everybody's donating to that. But since then, our annual appeal has gone from just under $20,000 a year to this past year, we generated over $40,000 and we're able to leverage a grant from a foundation for an additional $10,000 to $50,000. So, you know, I think and we do receive some business funds. It's an area we look at a lot and say, boy, if we could do more with the business community, it would be great. But this past year, we received funding from Amazon, actual cash funding from Amazon.
Well, that's good.
Which is not local, but they wanted a local presence. And, but yeah, so, I mean, there are opportunities out there. We do look for them as much as we, you know, possibly can. Your point, though, about businesses moving, you know, out of the community, that does make it difficult sometimes, if not impossible sometimes.
Be careful of anything Amazon gives you. They're your competitors. I mean, this could be a hostile takeover. Cash the check.
That's right.
I don't have a development officer. I am the development officer along with everything else and whoever else I can drag along with me to meetings. But we've been making great strides with businesses. Unfortunately, most of it's going to my capital campaign right now because I'm trying to build that building. So, but I am pitching to all the local businesses tomorrow. Tomorrow. Next week. With the idea that we can all work together, the library and the businesses, to strengthen Shippensburg's core, because we've lost a number of local businesses this year. So
No, you have a very good chamber down there, I have to say.
yeah.
It's
And my
very-
board
very
president now is a
convenient.
local business owner, so that helps. Yeah.
We didn't get to question 12. I thought that was self-explanatory in terms of state funding and the losses there. Jim, did you want to say anything?
Well, I just think it ought to be emphasized. I just think it ought to
And remember, a little bit goes a long, long
be-
way.
Well, all right, we'll keep it short. But I did want to understand the charter a little bit. Is that, so the library reimbursement funding that's been cut, you say, is that the 288,780?
Yes.
And, okay, now that is on the back here, though, it's like marked in blue, 288,7, which says public library
Oh,
subsidy.
it should be reversed. I'm sorry.
Okay,
The colors are reversed. Good
so,
catch.
so what, the,
The public library subsidy is in red, and the statewide library card reimbursement is in blue.
okay,
Now, there were 2 components to the statewide library card reimbursement. Part of it, the bulk of it, was used for outside county usage. However, there was a small component of the program that was a political sop that was thrown to basically suburban library systems in Philadelphia, because otherwise they would have lobbied against the statewide library card program years ago. So that we received a very small reimbursement for lending that happened between our libraries. So if somebody from Hampton Township went to Shippensburg and used that library, Shippensburg was getting a very small reimbursement for that particular transaction. So there were two components to the statewide library card program. That's why I said $154,462 of that $288,780 was actually used reimbursement for allocated usage.
All right. But the bottom line is essentially, if I'm reading this correctly, is that you have lost on an annual basis, there's someone over $700,000 in state library funding, right? On an annual basis,
Well,
since 2008.
Compared to what we were receiving in 2008, each year, it has been roughly $700-some thousand less than what we were getting in 2008.
Which, pretty much equates to the amount of funding you're asking us to provide in terms of an increase in property taxes. So, I mean, I think, and this is what I've been saying now for a number of years, if the state would just restore its share of the funding, we wouldn't be in this boat.
We would be in a smaller boat.
We have 5 minutes. I would like 2 minutes to summarize and talk about next steps. Are there any final questions that the commissioners have?
Yeah, I just want to make a comment. Gary had to leave for a couple of minutes. Gary, one of the things in the contingency fund that the library uses is the full annual state aid payment. I had asked them, and they're going to go back to their finance committee to see if they could use half of that amount, which would equate to a little over $500,000. Because as Joe, now you've stated, the state has never been, it's been late one time in the past 20-some years, and it's 4 months. So my thought is, why not make a half-year contingency instead of a full year? So I just want to make sure you do that. Okay. Larry, sorry.
Okay. I think for next steps, I think I'm going to ask the commissioners to hold an intervention if I get too far away, but my sense of the consensus among the commissioners at this point is that the 3 options presently on the table, none of them may be the one they want to go with. It doesn't mean that's not a negative thing. I think if you look at your 2 big questions, and then the question, which was the question of the library in the future, would you consider multi-year? And then go back to the thing about the numerous funds that you have, and that whole notion of coming up with what is it that you really need to cover, what you're at risk for operationally. What we might, what I would like to discuss with the commissioners is coming back to you within the next week or 2 with kind of like what we would like you to consider maybe in a new proposal or series of options other than the 3 that you provided. Again, this is not a negative. It is, I think I learned a lot. I think hopefully the commissioners have been able to clarify some of the questions. I think there's some big things, big light bulbs shining in the distance that could get us to something that's mutually agreeable, but I'll let the commissioners comment further on that.
Yeah, we'll do something again, because we'll say this board meeting, we're just trying to figure out, and, at least for me, get a feel of how all this works and what your expectations are for the future. So, as I said before, I pulled out my campaign thing, support county library, and I will in some way, shape, or form. I think we're going to, but we'll get there.
Yeah, I mean, the only thing I would say is that, I think I want to do what I can to maintain the viability of our superb library system in the County. Again, I think, I know you came to us a couple of years back, asked for an increase. You've had to continue to borrow from your reserves. And again, I don't mind pointing the finger at the state. I mean, the bottom line is that's the reason why you're back to see us again, is the state hasn't restored, the funding that they have cut. In addition to that, we asked for legislative authorization, or for them to consider legislative authorization for us to consider if we wanted to put in question of future increases in library tax on the ballot as it was, originally implemented here in Cumberland County, and they refused to even budge on that. So at the end of the day, it kind of like falls on us to address this situation. I don't like, you guys know that, my colleagues know, I don't like increase, I don't like the property tax. I think it remains, onerous and in a lot of cases extremely unfair. But again, we have to think about, the quality of life in our communities, and I think our library systems are a big part of our library system, and our libraries are a big part of that. So I don't think we can ignore that. And, but again, finding that happy medium of where we are going to go, I think that's still, subject to discussion. But I think we all want to support our libraries.
I'll just mention too, I think there is support here. There's not a recognition that it's been a while, quite a while, and there's a need to look at the revenue side of things as well. But as you know, for some years, the board has had an ongoing dialogue with virtually all of our departments and outside organizations on simply asking the question, are there better ways to do what we're doing? And we've made some good progress, especially recently, on finding some new ways of doing things, and maybe putting some things on a more realistic basis than what some of them have been in the past. So I think Larry's correct that I was personally underwhelmed with just the three options put in front of us. I think maybe we need to look a little broader, think a little longer range, maybe a little more forward-looking, some emphasis on sustainability, and take note of the fact that we are in a big change environment, not just for you folks, but for us too. So there's a lot of demands out there, and obviously limited dollars. Jim spoke for all of us. Nobody's real anxious to hit the property tax again, and it's one of the few tools we have. So we want to make sure when we go there that we're getting the best deal that we can possibly get for the owners. So we just want to throw some new ideas out there and discuss those with you folks.
And all this will run in parallel with the timeline we use for the creation of and submission of the county's overall budget. So I think if the commissioners are in agreement, we will try to get something back to you within the next couple of weeks. I would strongly urge you to have that discussion with your finance committee about the questions and the issues and the options.
The funds and the fine policy.
And to do that, if you need anybody from the county there to answer questions or clarify things, we can do it in multiple languages, so just let me know. All right?
Thanks so much for taking the time.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for your